Welcome back to This Week. Time now to get the views of our media and political experts, Metro Councilman at Large and Democratic Operative Jerry Maynard, and heard daily on 1510 WLAC syndicated talk show host Steve Gill. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
This week, State Senator Jim Somerville proposed what he calls the Civil Rights Initiative Act of 2013. It bans preferential treatment on race, gender, and ethnicity when it comes to hiring practices. He says it makes the playing field more fair. Is this a step backwards for civil rights, or does it do just that?
It's a step back for civil rights, and the fact they call it civil rights is laughable. Here's why. Is we still have discrimination based on gender, we still have discrimination based on race, ethnicity, and religion. And so in order to combat that, we have to have proactive measures. And so we're not saying that we want quotas, we're not saying that at all, but consideration of race given our past history in Tennessee of racism, the appropriate thing is to continue the very limited structured measures that we take right now to make it an even playing field, and that's what we're doing.
I think it's unfortunate that saying we have to be racist in order to be non-racist. If you're picking or having preferences for or against somebody because of skin color, gender, any other of these issues, that's wrong. And I think we ought to be able to come together and say it's wrong. If you do it, we're going to come down on you, whether you're doing it preferentially for your color or somebody else's color.
Should diversity be a consideration? He would eliminate diversity officers in public colleges and universities as a recommendation for hiring teachers in public schools for any state employment and state contracts.
Let me say it again. There's racism in Tennessee. There's gender discrimination in Tennessee going on right now. There are lawsuits filed every day. And so what we have to do is take measures that are reasonable and say that diversity is not only a value, but all people benefit, white people, black people, Hispanics, by having a diverse group there. But more importantly, Bob, it's a recognition of a history of racism, and it's a recognition that racism continues, that we have these programs that are very limited and very reasonable. Unlike Steve says, you don't have a racism being replaced by racism. You have an acknowledgement of racism, and we take measures to combat it.
I think there's a difference, though, in recruiting people, saying, look, we want a more diverse pool of qualified people into this, instead of just saying, oh, we're just going to go to the people we know. And that's going to, again, probably have that same pool of all white, all black, or whatever you're going to have. You want to expand your outreach and your recruiting, but discriminating against people, I think, is just wrong.
Senator Lamar Alexander this week proposed what he proposed 30 years ago, a so-called grand swap. The federal government takes care of costs from Medicaid, the state does education, maybe some training costs. Any possibility of this going anywhere?
Absolutely not.
And I'm
so glad that Lamar Alexander. Well, I'm so glad that Lamar Alexander came down to Tennessee to tell us about legislation that didn't go anywhere 30 years ago. It's not going to go anywhere now. But also, we got to realize is that our federal dollars that come for education, if we say we're going to take all those federal dollars, or we're going to take over for that program, what if we run out of money? We have no place to go. And you want to add more resource officers in schools? Where are you going to go to get those additional dollars if you can't go back to the federal government?
I think it was funny that you had Lieutenant Governor Ron Ramsey saying, I don't know anything about this plan, but I'm for it. Jim Kyle saying, I don't know anything about this plan, but I'm against it. I think that partisan split is why it's certainly not going to go anywhere in the Democrat-controlled Senate and with the Republican-controlled U.S. House. I think that the moving of money back here, well, we'll get bigger bang for our bucks, whether it's in education, job training, is the right idea. I saw a study the other day that when you add the total amount of money we're spending on poverty programs, we're spending $61,000 per year for every family in poverty. We could just write them a check for 40 and be $20,000 ahead of the game. The carry cost of sending money to Washington and getting that money back is out of control. We just had the Department of Labor announce that they lost $5 billion in unemployment compensation payments. But they aren't running our money right. I think we'll do it better here.
But let me deal with this. If you look at the state of New York and you look at the other states, they send more money to the federal government, get less back. You know what states send less money and get more money back from the federal government? The states in the South, like Tennessee, Alabama, Kentucky, Mississippi. And so when we're complaining about federal dollars and a state taking over and running it better, please, we're losing money. We send less money to the federal government than we get for our local governments.
I think, though, to clarify that split of money, one of the reasons that you see a lot of those southern states that Jerry cites getting, quote, more back is because you've got military bases in a lot of those facilities, because a lot of those states are on our borders where you've got military facilities. So it's not a matter of, for example, welfare payments that are being sent disparatively towards the South versus New York. You've got splits in terms of all federal dollars, and I think you've got to put into a context that military bases, things like Oak Ridge, other installations that cause the money to flow here have nothing to do with them going into the pockets of Tennessee.
You also have poor working families as well, and you have healthcare issues in the South that you don't have in other states that are richer. So it's not just military bases, it's because you have a suppression of wages here in the state of Tennessee.
I don't think you can say that there's a poverty imbalance when you look at Detroit, that is basically going bankrupt, Chicago, Philadelphia, Boston, New York City. I mean, let's not pretend that there's more poverty in the South than these major metropolitan areas that are going bankrupt.
I'm looking statewide, and if you look at statewide, you consider New York versus Tennessee. You have more poverty in Tennessee. You have some suppression of wages, and they are lower on average than they are in New York or in Illinois or in Boston. And Boston is not going bankrupt. They're doing quite fine.
Vice President this week made his recommendations concerning possible gun control legislation, universal registration for gun owners, all sales, possible banning of assault weapons, possible banning of multi-clip, multi-ammunition clips. Will this move forward? Is something going to come out of this? Something going to happen in regards to gun control
I don't
issues?
think anything significant. I think the big problem for the president in pushing serious gun control issues at the national level really resides in the U.S. Senate. You've got 14 Democrat U.S. senators who are facing re-election, many of them in red states. For example, you've got a Joe Manchin in West Virginia. He's already backed off on gun control issues. You've got Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota, I think it was, that just got elected. She's backing off. You've got 2 Democrat senators in Montana. Neither of them are going to be for gun control. A Republican or a Democrat, Mark Pryor in Arkansas, just saw Arkansas go 20 points against Barack Obama. The problem for the Democrats are Democrats in the U.S. Senate are not going to go along with gun control.
You may have 10 Senate Democrats who not vote for this, but you'll overcome it with some Republicans coming over as long as it's reasonable and limited. And what I mean by reasonable is universal background checks on all gun purchases. Universal, getting rid of these magazines and clips that can have 100 and 200, so you can shoot 100 rounds or 200 rounds in less than 60 seconds and 90 seconds. I think if you have those 2 things, it will pass the Senate. Maybe some Democrats may not vote for it for political coverage, but you'll have an overwhelming majority of the Senate voting for it if you have those 2 reasonable measures. The question is, what do they do about mental health care? What do you do about these video games? And when you deal with First Amendment rights, Bob, that's where I think it goes nowhere. And I agree with Steve on this. I think it'll be watered down because when you think about mental health care and you think about First Amendment rights, we're not going to be able to cover all that.
Jerry Maynard, Steve Gill, appreciate your time and your insights. Stay with us as we continues in a moment.